Okay, today we're going to read Isaiah 36 to 39. This is the primary historical section of Isaiah. We had one earlier in chapter 7 and 8, and this is the main one of the book. We've actually already read this material, okay? We read this when we went over this same section in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, and I went ahead and read out these chapters of Isaiah to help provide further context for the events that were occurring in the historical narrative at that time. So this information should be completely familiar. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because we've already read it and we already have covered it in, I think, significant detail. But I'm going to read it again so that we get a feel for this section in the context of the book of Isaiah itself. A lot of this stuff, especially the description of the invasion and the siege of Jerusalem, is very close to word for word what we read about in Kings and Chronicles. I think that's indicative of Isaiah having originally authored the material that ended up being incorporated into the historical books, and we see that preserved in the book of Isaiah itself. But anyway, so a lot of it is going to be extremely similar. But I do think it's a good idea to read this section in the context of the book of Isaiah itself, and not just skip over these next few chapters and go straight to chapter 40, because this will help us understand. Now that we've read the first part of Isaiah, the first 35 chapters, we can understand now what those 35 chapters are leading up to. You know, I believe the prophecies of the first 35 chapters of Isaiah are written in the context before the Assyrian invasion, which occurs in Judah in 701 BC. And then everything that we read in the prophecies of the book of Isaiah after this section, chapter 40 and onward, are spoken afterwards, and they deal with things to come afterwards. And these chapters themselves kind of help shift the focus as we did deal with the Assyrian invasion, which we've been preparing for since the beginning of the book. And that situation gets resolved. And then we look ahead to another crisis that's going to come down the road well after the days of Isaiah. So I think it's good to read these sections again, even though we've already read them, these chapters again, even though we've already read them. So we get a feel not only of the historical events that occur here, but how this section fits into the context of the book of Isaiah itself, and how that in turn can help us contextualize and understand the entire book of Isaiah, in general. But we have already read this stuff, so we're not going to go over it in too much detail, because we've already covered this stuff in greater detail earlier. So this will be a fairly quick video series today, at least by our standards. Isaiah chapter 36. Remember, we just got done finishing the woe oracles, and the woe oracles started off with a bunch of woes aimed at the Israelites, first in Ephraim and then in Jerusalem, and ended up with a woe towards Assyria for what they're about to do. Assyria is not going to escape punishment for its own role in this. They may be a tool of God, but they're still acting sinfully in their own hearts. And of course we have the whole thing about the wilderness becoming a fruitful, blossoming land again. And that finishes the whole section of the first part of Isaiah, which is all, I believe, spoken and written, or spoken at least, in the context of what's about to happen here in Isaiah 36. In the 14th year, King Hezekiah's reign. Now, this is generally dated to be 701 BC, which of course we put Hezekiah, the beginning of Hezekiah's reign, in 715 BC. Some of these prophecies we've read about happened while Ahaz, Hezekiah's father, was still king, and some of them happened while Hezekiah was king, and we really didn't get a clear distinction for the most part. We had a couple of sections that were more clearly dated to the days of Ahaz, but we didn't get, for a lot of it, we didn't get a real clear distinction of when. Anyway, Sennacherib, so in the 14th year, King Hezekiah's reign, this is 701 BC according to our dates, according to our calendar, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, attacked all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. So this invasion, this long-awaited invasion, is finally happening. Ever since Ahaz signaled for help for Assyria, we read about that way back in Isaiah 7, King Ahaz was being attacked by his northern neighbors, Israel, and north of them, Aram, the capital of Damascus. And Isaiah went to go talk to him, to comfort him, give him a message from God that these two kings that are dealing with him, that he's so afraid of, are going to be dealt with by God. And Ahaz didn't really want to have anything to do with that. Ahaz had already made up his mind, that he probably had already made up his mind, that he was going to send for help for the king of Assyria. He did that, whether he had already made up his mind at the time Isaiah went to go talk to him, or he made up his mind afterwards. He did send for help from the king of Assyria. And that ultimately leads to the situation that we had. That was 30 years ago. Like, that was in the 730s BC. That was 30 years previously. That was when Tiglath-Pileser was still king of Assyria, and Ahaz was king of Judah. But 30 years later, we're going to have to pay a price for this, because Assyria is going to come back again. Now, we read about in Kings, we read a few references to treachery and betrayal in Isaiah, that Hezekiah did try to pay Sennacherib off. Sennacherib came to Judah and attacked them. Hezekiah did try to pay him off, but it didn't work. Apparently he took the money, Sennacherib did, but did not call off the attack. Now, just to go over the events of the Assyrian kings again quickly. I mentioned how there was a king called Tiglath-Pileser, who was around when Ahaz first called to Syria for help 30 years ago. Tiglath-Pileser reigned from 745 to 727 BC. He died. Then a guy named Shalmaneser V reigned from 727 to 722 BC, and he was the one who began the siege of Samaria, which ended the northern kingdom of Israel. He didn't finish that siege. He died, and someone, I think his brother, named Sargon, I told you before about the evil king named Sargon, took over, finished the siege of Samaria, and he reigned from 722 to 705 BC. So he was the king of Assyria when Ahaz died and Hezekiah became sole king of Judah and inherited the vassal relationship with Assyria that he got from his father. Sargon was the king at that time. In 705 BC, Sargon dies, and a guy named Sennacherib becomes king. And it's at that time that a lot of the nations that had been under the yoke of Assyria try to rebel. Judah is not the only one in this regard. This is now 701 BC. Sennacherib has spent the first few years of his reign dealing with Babylon and other threats. Like I said earlier in my previous videos, Judah was never the highest item on Assyria's priority list. So they get to other threats, more immediate threats first, and then come to Judah after a period of time. So Sennacherib has been king for a few years now, and he's had to put down these revolts that started after Sargon died, his predecessor. And now, after a few years of fighting other countries, he has turned his attention to Judah. And as we read in the King's account, Hezekiah does try to buy him off, apparently intending only to buy himself some time to get ready for this invasion. I'm not really clear. But it doesn't work because Assyria apparently takes the money but doesn't call off the invasion. So at any rate, this long-awaited invasion, which Isaiah has been warning about now for years, 30 years now practically, has finally happened. The king of Assyria, they already wiped out Israel years ago. The northern kingdom of Israel fell, and that itself happened over 20 years. They finally fell for good in 722 BC. Even that was over 20 years ago now. And now it's time for Judah. The water is going to reach up to Judah's neck, as Isaiah prophesied 30 years earlier. So, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah's reign, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, attacked all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. Then the king of Assyria sent his field commander. Now in this text it just says field commander. In some translations it will render that word as the Rabshakeh or whatever. With a large army from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem. When the commander stopped at the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to the washerman's field, that's where Isaiah met Ahaz 30 years ago or so, in Isaiah chapter 7. Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, the palace administrator, we read about him a few chapters ago, and he was called the firm and sturdy peg who's going to hold up the house after Shebna falls. Shebna, the secretary, so there's Shebna, apparently the one. Now we don't get a hint of that here in this chapter, in this section, but apparently from the context regarding the oracle's address of these two men earlier, Shebna was the one who was convincing Hezekiah to turn his attention and his faith to alliances with foreign nations, and not strictly to God. But I don't know. I mean, I really don't. That's just, it seems like it. Anyway, here they both are, as well as the third guy, Joah, son of Asaph, the reporter, went out to him. The field commander said to them, these three guys representing the king, "Tell Hezekiah, this is what the great king, the king of Assyria, says. On what are you basing this confidence of yours? You say you have strategy and military strength." We read about that all throughout the book of Isaiah, haven't we? We read Isaiah give these woes to Jerusalem for putting their faith in these extra things, their strategies and their alliances and their human efforts to withstand this invasion. But you speak only empty words. On whom are you depending that you rebel against me? Look now. You are depending on Egypt, that splintered reed of a staff, which pierces a man's hand and wounds him if he leans on it. So Assyria knows that Jerusalem has been trying to make an alliance with Egypt, and they have the same opinion of Egypt that God does. They're not going to be of any help to you. Such is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who depend on him. And if you say to me, we are depending on Jehovah our God, isn't he the one whose high places and altars Hezekiah removed, saying to Judah and Jerusalem, you must worship before this altar, the only one in Jerusalem? We read about that in the Kings and Chronicles. Hezekiah did remove these high places where they had been offering sacrifices to God. They were offering sacrifices to God, not to a fake God, not to Baal or anything like that, but they weren't supposed to do it anywhere but Jerusalem. A lot of the good kings of the past tolerated these high places, because at least the people were offering sacrifices to Jehovah, Israel's God. But Hezekiah comes along and wipes those out, and says you're only going to do it in Jerusalem. Now, to the ancient mind, this is a weird thing to do. Okay, this guy, he may be aware of Hezekiah. Obviously, he is aware that Hezekiah has done this, but he doesn't understand why Hezekiah has done it. To him, this is a way of, this weakens Hezekiah's God. This is not going to benefit Hezekiah's God, or Hezekiah, to take away the God's altars or his shrines or his high places. That wouldn't make any sense to this guy. So he knows that Hezekiah has done this, and he assumes this is a bad thing, that this is not going to help. He doesn't know Hezekiah's God. Come now, make a bargain with my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses if you can put riders on them. How then can you repulse one officer of the least of my master's officials, even though you are depending on Egypt for chariots and horsemen? Which we read earlier they were not supposed to do. Furthermore, have I come to attack and destroy this land without the Lord, Jehovah? The Lord himself told me to march against this country and destroy it. Now, he may be speaking somewhat accurately here. We have read already in Isaiah that God calls Assyria his tool, his hired hand, his weapon of judgment. So there may be a legitimate awareness somewhere in the minds and hearts of the Assyrians that they were told to do this by Israel's God. We have seen God give visions to other leaders. He gave a vision to Ahimelech in Abraham's day, to Pharaoh in Joseph's day, of course. He'll give visions to Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel's day. He communicated with a guy named Balaam the prophet in the days of Moses. So God does give visions and speak to people who are not Israelites. So he could have at some point communicated at least some kind of message to these people, or maybe even they knew what the prophet himself was saying about the Assyrians. It's possible. So he's not completely wrong here, but obviously his attitude and his focus is wrong. Then Eliakim, Shebna, and Joah said to the field commander, please speak to your servants in Aramaic, since we understand it. Don't speak to us in Hebrew, in the hearing of the people on the wall. So there's an international language diplomacy meeting they're having here, and the people in the walls only speak Hebrew, their native language. They don't speak the international tongue of Aramaic, which all these guys do because they're educated officials. But Rabshakeh speaks Hebrew too. I don't know if this means he was an Israelite who, I don't know, it's possible. I mean, it's not really inconceivable that he could be. I mean, the Assyrians conquered Israel and took the people captive, so he could be. But he knows how to speak their language at least. But the commander replied, "Was it only to your master and you that my master sent me to say these things, and not to the men sitting on the wall, who, like you, will have to eat their own filth and drink their own urine?" That's what you do in a siege. Then the commander stood and called out in Hebrew, "Here are the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. This is what the king says. Do not let Hezekiah deceive you. He cannot deliver you. Do not let Hezekiah persuade you to trust in the Lord when he says, 'The Lord will surely deliver us. This city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria.' Do not listen to Hezekiah." Now he's overstepped his bounds. Maybe earlier he was just skirting within the limits of tolerance, but now he's overstepped his bounds. "This is what the king of Assyria says. Make peace with me and come out to me. Then every one of you will eat from his own vine and fig tree and drink water from his own cistern until I come and take you to a land like your own, a land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards." This is like an evil version of God's own promises to them. The king of Assyria is saying, "Put your faith in me and I'll take care of you. I'll take you away to another land, a land that's not yours. But it'll be a good land. Just surrender to me. Do not let Hezekiah mislead you when he says the Lord will deliver us. Has the God of any nation ever delivered his land from the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Have they rescued Samaria from my hand? Who of all the gods of these countries has been able to save his land from me? How then can Jehovah deliver Jerusalem from my hand?" He was right to say these other gods didn't protect their countries from Assyria, but he's wrong to compare God, the real God, to these other false man-made gods. But the people remained silent and said nothing in reply, because the king had commanded, "Do not answer him." Then Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, the palace administrator, Shebna the secretary, and Joah, son of Asaph the recorder, went to Hezekiah with their clothes torn, and told him what the field commander had said. When King Hezekiah heard this, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and went into the temple of the Lord. He sent Eliakim, the palace administrator, Shebna the secretary. Eliakim definitely seems to be the top guy of these three. So I'm guessing Shebna has already been demoted from where he was before, but he hasn't been. Now, that prophecy against him earlier seemed to indicate that he would end up being taken captive, or at least being sent out of the land somehow or another. And that doesn't seem to have happened yet, because here he is with the rest of them. Yeah. Yeah, my goodness. Yeah, there it is. Where are we here? 22, verse 15. Shebna is described as being in charge of the palace. And here he's just a secretary, and Eliakim is the palace administrator. So the change in power seems to have happened already. But it also goes on to say in chapter 22 that in verse 18 that the Lord will roll Sheba up like a ball and throw him into a large country and he will die there. That hasn't happened yet, so I don't know when that happens, I guess afterwards. But he is still around, it's just he's been demoted from being in charge of the palace to being the secretary. And Eliakim is in charge of the palace now, apparently. He said, Eliakim, the palace administrator, Shebna the secretary, and the leading priests, all wearing sackcloth, to the prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz. They told him, this is what Hezekiah says. This day is a day of distress and rebuke and disgrace, as when children come to the point of birth and there is no strength to deliver them. It may be the Lord your God will hear the words of the field commander, whom his master, the king of Assyria, has sent to ridicule the living God, and that he will rebuke him for the words of the Lord your God, emphasizing Isaiah's connection to this God now, has heard. Therefore, pray for the remnant that still survives. In this case, I think they're talking about the physical remnant, the people who are still literally alive. You know, the armies of Assyria are tearing up the countryside, so a lot of them have probably already fallen by this point. So I think in this case, remnant is referring literally to the physical survivors who are still alive. When King Hezekiah's officials came to Isaiah, Isaiah said to them, tell your master, this is what the Lord says. Do not be afraid of what you have heard. These words with which the underlings of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Listen, I am going to put a spirit in him, so that when he hears a certain report, he will return to his own country, and there I will cut him down with the sword. When the field commander heard the king of Assyria had left Lachish, he withdrew and found the king fighting against Libnah. Now, Sennacherib received a report. Now, I'm assuming this is the report that we just got done hearing about a couple verses ago. Sennacherib received a report that Tirhakah, the Cushite king of Egypt, was marching out to fight against him. When he heard it, he sent messengers to Hezekiah with this word. Say to Hezekiah, king of Judah, do not let the God you depend on deceive you when he says, Jerusalem will not be handed over to the king of Assyria. Surely you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the countries, destroying them completely. And will you be delivered? Did the gods of the nations that were destroyed by my forefathers deliver them? The gods of Gozan, Haran, Rezoph, the people of Eden who were in Tel Assar? Where is the king of Hamath, the king of Arpad, the king of the city of Sepharvaim, or of Hena or Ivah? Hezekiah received the letter from the messengers and ran. I'm assuming Sennacherib is going to fight against this Pharaoh. But I really don't know. That it gets confusing along here. He receives a report that Egypt is coming against him. It seems like he's withdrawing in order to go deal with that, but I don't think a battle actually happens here. It doesn't appear as though the Egyptians are actually coming, or if they do, a battle actually is fought here. It doesn't seem like it, but it's not really clear at all. Hezekiah received the letter from the messengers and read it. Then he went up to the temple of the Lord and spread it out before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed to the Lord. So he's no longer asking Isaiah to intercede for him. He's praying to God himself. Oh, he prayed to the Lord. O Lord Almighty, God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Give ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see. There's that hearing and seeing imagery again, which has been prominent all throughout Isaiah. Listen to all the words Sennacherib has sent to insult the living God. It is true, O Lord, that the Assyrian kings have laid waste all these peoples and their lands. That's happened. That's a fact. The gods of those lands were not able to save the people because they were not really gods. They have thrown their gods into the fire and destroyed them, for they were not gods, but only wood and stone, fashioned by human hands. Now, O Lord our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all kingdoms on earth may know that you alone, O Lord, are God. So that's the problem. And next video, we'll read the solution.